asking questions in advance is the most important thing I can do. We may settle on one approach, but if that approach doesn't work, if for some reason we get on set and the client changes the needs, or we start working towards something and it just needs tweaking, I've already had 3 or 4 other approaches in mind. And it allows me to fall back on some of that. So I've done my research and I'm prepared with Plan B if Plan A doesn't work.
You got a pillow if you lost yours. You got a seat at my table. You got a here's somebody who believes you. Let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a
Welcome to The Creator's Journey. I'm your host, Charles Gupton. Fears and obstacles on the journey of creation are things we all face. Every creator who works from the heart faces the same challenges. You are not alone. In each episode, I talk with creative leaders about the mindsets and processes they use to push through their struggles to create and put their work out into the world in order to make a difference. If creating an impact is something you're struggling to achieve at this point in your life, and you believe the encouragement and feedback of a trusted group of creative leaders could make a difference in your growth, I have a solution. I'm leading 2 Impact Accelerator Mastermind groups to help a select number of creative leaders achieve objectives that are simply not possible working alone. If you're interested in building a new body of work based on renewed creative energy and deep encouragement to grow, please let me help you do that. Contact me at charlesgupton.com. And thanks for joining me on this journey.
Here's the key to my front door. You got a pillow if you lost yours. You got a seat at my table. You got a here's somebody who believes you. Let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a
This show is a departure from my regular format where I talk with one guest about his or her mindset around the process of creating impactful work. In this episode, I'll be talking with 5 different creative leaders about their thoughts on one topic, the issue of how to get back on track creatively when you've been derailed from your plans or process, for whatever reason. Whether you're in the middle of your own creative process, consulting with a client, or facilitating a discussion in an intimate mastermind group, the issue of how to create and ship your work is, from my experience, an ongoing concern. And one of the primary concerns is how to get back on track once you're derailed. I'd love to have your feedback on this episode since it is a change of pace. If you have any suggestions, thoughts for future episodes, or possible guests to recommend, please email me at charlesgupton.com. You can find out more about each guest on today's show in the show notes for this episode at thecreatorsjourney.com. Since my friend Julia Gilmore is partially responsible for the topic of today's episode, I thought I should start my conversations with her. I say that Julia is partly responsible because we've had several conversations about the struggles we've both faced when the day gets derailed, as well as how to encourage our clients when they get off track as well. Julia is a copywriter based in Nelson, British Columbia, but she also helps clients direct their business strategy through her consulting work and the masterminds that she leads for heart-centered entrepreneurs and mompreneurs. You can find out more about her at juliagilmore.com. So, Julia, what kinds of interruptions or incidents do you find that can throw your day or maybe even a week off schedule?
Just recently probably gone through one of those toughest moments that I have as an entrepreneur and as a mom. I refer to it as my bandwidth, the amount of bandwidth I have. And I've kind of hit this moment in the past couple of weeks where I had a new client that I'm working with a major client launch. So a lot of demands by the client for my time and my focus. I got sick with a dreadful flu, and then my daughter got sick right after with a dreadful flu. In the winter, I solo parent a lot of the time because my husband works away. He's a ski guide in the mountains. So a lot falls on my plate anyway. And on this particular occasion, everything sort of fell on my plate. And the bandwidth gets taxed quickly. One of the biggest problems I find that I have in order to maintain is keeping up on sleep. And when you have a child that's waking up in the middle of the night 3 or 4 times, that quickly diminishes on your sleep. And I would say that I'm a bit of a vet in handling it, although, after about a week of that, you start to fade. And what I realize is my brain and my synapses and that creative groove that I need to be on in order to be able to respond and to be able to create copy and to be able to, respond with strategies and all of these things, it started to get really taxed. And I felt sluggish. I start to get really slow mentally. I began to even struggle with my own story with, am I good enough? What these client wants, can I deliver on the level that I want to and that they're looking at? And do I have what it takes? And, you go through, I think as sleep starts to diminish and that stress level automatically starts to come up, and then you become quite susceptible to just stories and stress. And so that bandwidth gets even more taxed because of all of the side effects of the lack of sleep and the stress. And, and it's this really dreadful cycle and that you go through, and it can be quite consuming. When my daughter was 18 months, I hit a very similar spot, and I didn't realize it until sort of 6 months out from it. But I found myself in adrenal fatigue, which I think a lot of women, I think a lot of moms do with small kids, and they don't even know that they're in it. Wow. It's one of those things that we don't really talk about enough. And I work with a lot of mompreneurs and solopreneurs and women, and I'm just starting to have that conversation with a lot of them now, and hearing my experience reflected back to me as situation normal.
And it's important to talk about it. Are there any processes or mindsets, ways that you have found to pull yourself out of that downward spiral narrative that you were just describing, to pull yourself back out of it and get back on track to be able to function? Because as we all know, if that continues down, then everything goes down. Parenting, work. How do you recover and pull back up again?
It's a tough one. And I'm healthy. I mean, Charles, we've talked about chopping wood and hauling water because that's where we live and that's what we do. I live in the mountains and you live out on your farm. And so I have a very sort of lifestyle-driven existence, and it's intentional and it's very health-oriented. So when I get sick and down and start losing sleep, I immediately look at my nutrition, because that's one of the first things we start eating, white and brown food and things that are easy to put in your mouth. So I really try and make sure that I am staying up on getting greens in me and any sort of green supplements that I can do. So that's one thing, is to really not let my diet just go to hell just because my life is. And the other thing that is huge is, is that I've been here and I know this one. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, and I've been a solopreneur for a long time. And so I know the ups and downs and sort of that mental roller coaster that can come. So I also know that if I just apply myself, I can work through it. The other thing is deadlines don't go away. So you just have to. You just dig deep. And sometimes your work might not be as good, or you don't feel as good about it. But probably the biggest tool that I have come to rely on, well, there's two of them, and the one that I use personally is meditation. And I would like to say that I have a daily meditation practice, and sometimes I do, but it's difficult. It's, you've just heard a small window onto, kind of typical life of, kids, work, clients, solo parenting, the madness. But whenever I get the chance So at least a few times a week, I stop, drop, and meditate for 20 minutes. And when that stress comes up and those, little story demons in my head start questioning whether I can handle it and if I'm good enough and, any sort of other, great sort of self-flagellating conversation I want to have with myself, when I feel that vibration of just stress and anxiety and worry, that's another signal to stop, drop, and meditate. And so I really, truly use that as a coping tool to level me out, get present, to drop the story. As much as possible, I get out and try and get up in the mountains. I go for a run or go for a hike, or, depending on the season. So getting outside, that's another thing that I am really faithful about doing. And I have a dog that requires that exercise. So that's sort of my trigger to get me out as well. So those are, so nutrition, exercise, and meditation those are just fundamental things that help me manage. And as you know, and we've worked together on this one, is I have a mastermind. And so I can lean into my mastermind for help and advice, and insights, and to have things reflected back to me that I might not see, or to just help me traverse some of those trickier spots and get some feedback about ways that I can be more effective in my life or my job or whatever. So those are sort of it. I look at the health stuff as it's necessary, it's mandatory. Without that, I don't know if I would be able to manage and keep going.
How has your experience created empathy or compassion for some of your clients or other folks that you work with, as both your clients, but also folks that you mastermind with or that you may be coaching or consulting through their work process?
As I have come through the first 3 years of my daughter's life and navigated what it is to be a mom and an entrepreneur and to dance that dance, it's made me realize like there's a lot of women in my position that maybe don't know what I know or have the support structure that I have. And so I've actually started in this past 6 months is to refocus my work more on connecting and supporting mompreneurs. Now I do, content marketing and online marketing strategies for clients, and do everything from, writing copy, coming up with Facebook ads, but where I really feel I can be the most effective and of the highest level of service and support is I've started running masterminds for mompreneurs and holding space for these women to help them with their strategies and their business and ideas, but also, to help them navigate the other stuff that is every bit as prevalent and in their face as their work responsibilities and building their businesses. And that's their family stuff, and that coping and managing and sharing my strategies and the things that I've learned as well, because there's no line between them. You're never not a mom and you're never not an entrepreneur. You're both. And the two things compete. They're like two competing businesses. Like they don't intersect anywhere. There's no overlap. There's at no point does one feed the other. They just sort of are always in competition for your time and attention with each other. So that's one thing that I've done is I've changed the scope of my business to start supporting more women who are going through and have, gone through and are navigating what I still am navigating, but have at least a handle on, and I can see it. I see them struggle. And I think that's huge. Women, we need that. I remember when my daughter was first born, I almost didn't want to tell clients that I was pregnant and having a child because I didn't want them to think that for some reason I wouldn't be capable, that I wouldn't be able to show up and do the work, that somehow having a child made me weak or unreliable, and I didn't want them to see me as that. So I probably worked and stressed, doubly, triply hard to make sure that didn't happen. And having a child doesn't make you weak. It makes you incredibly strong and resilient and resourceful and efficient. Coming to that terms with that myself, and then supporting other women in it as well, has been sort of a pivotal change in my business and the way I show up. And it's been great. It's been really fun.
I credit our conversations around this topic, the conversations that we've had in our mastermind sessions around this topic with helping me see this as a need for discussion, because there are so many people, but especially a lot of moms that are struggling in these areas. And it's a lot easier to work with somebody who has a comprehension of the struggles you're going through, so that compassion and empathy is there rather than having to be established. So that's a huge advantage for where you are in the struggle with helping others who are there as well. So thanks for your thoughts on that.
I'll just add that, whenever I start a mastermind and we kind of go through, you do all this goal setting and where they want to be in 6 months, 12 months, and how we're going to get there. And then we look at what might get in the way. And, a lot of times women, people in general, but, they're like, well, I'm a perfectionist. So often I procrastinate or I don't take action because it's not perfect. And I'm like, okay, and what else? And that Michael Bungee stand, what else? What else? And what else? And then sometimes people, but often they don't. And I said, and what about flu season? And people will stop and they go, what? And I'm like, what about flu season? That can shut you down for a week to 6 weeks, depending on how many kids you have, and completely affect your ability to show up and accomplish the goals on the timeline that you set. And that it's so real, like flu season it's like a season, and you can put it in the calendar. We seem to forget every year that once it comes around that, the moms or the dads, that are working from home, this is a major wrench in their machine. This is like the ultimate bottleneck is flu season. So that's one of the things that I've really started to share with people, because I've recognized it now, that it's the same. If you have children, they're going to get sick, and chances are you will as well. So you've got to sort of factor that in there as well somewhere.
Well, Julia, thank you. I appreciate your time, knowing that you're on a tight time frame in flu season, going through the very things that we're talking about. So I am appreciative of your time and energy.
Well, thank you, Charles. It's always so much fun to talk with you, and I look forward to masterminding with you again soon.
Dom Rella is the founding partner and creative director at Engine Brand Makers in Durham, North Carolina. He was gracious to be one of my first guests on the Creator's Journey when I was originally filming the conversations. You can see a short excerpt from that chat at charlesgupton.com under the Motion tab. Dom also graciously designed the distinctive identity branding for this podcast that helps make it stand out. For that, I am grateful beyond words. You can find Dom through his company's website, enginegogo.com. So, Dom, how often do you find yourself derailed or in the thrash?
I've been a professional for a long enough time, and I've been doing this for a long enough time where, there's ups and downs in our lives, and generally, unless there's some big thing going on, you learn how to perform at a reasonably high level on a consistent basis. So to answer your question, not often. I don't think I have the time to overthink things. And to me, that's what the thrash means. Just got too much stuff on my mind, and I am overthinking things and overanalyzing it. So I don't often find myself in the thrash.
What are some of the obstacles that may pop up, or the kinds of incidents that may pop up that when you do hit those kinds of incidents or those kinds of places that may blow things out?
What can happen is insomnia, didn't have a good night's sleep, something going on in my life outside of work that's distracting, not feeling particularly creative or motivated, I'm not properly caffeinated enough. To somewhat contradict what I just said, sure, that crops up where I'm just not being productive, and short of major things going on in my life, it happens. Interesting thing is, and I suspect that a lot of people find this to be true for themselves, is when you're busy, you're more productive. Productivity begets productivity. And what's that old saying? If you want to get something done, give it to a busy person. I feel that's the case. If I'm busy, I can really be efficient and productive and in the zone. If things are a little slower, then it's kind of sometimes hard to have that focus and be, quote, creative and produce things. So that kind of is I'd rather be busy than not.
Right.
I think it's a famous designer, maybe it's Milton Glaser, who's in his 80s, and he's still working in his studio. He's still producing. And I think he said something like, I just can't imagine not doing this. And I thought to myself, well, that's the first time I ever thought of myself that way. It's like, if I'm not designing something, even if it's a flyer or an ad or something that's really not that, quote, creative that's going to go in my book, I am happiest when I'm at the computer designing something. Not having anything to do is an obstacle, if that makes any sense.
Downtimes can make us emotionally feel like we're in a thrash, even if we're not in one created out of a particular kind of incident, or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Dom, is there a particular event that may, at some point, felt like you just blew you out of the water? And if so, how did you respond to it? And what are some lessons that came out of it for you?
Well, yeah, I think one thing that has come to mind, among other things, is a few years back, probably 6 years ago, my marriage started to have difficulties. And over the course of a year, as many people can relate to, a breakup of a relationship and a marriage is very difficult, especially a long one like the one I was in. And at the beginning, it was extremely difficult. Probably the first 2 months, the marriage having issues was extremely difficult. I don't know, looking back, how I went to work every day, and I did go to work every day. For a couple of months, it was amazingly trying, and every day was a struggle.
Right.
What I found was that I needed to simply talk it through with people. I certainly saw a therapist. I talked to friends and family about it, and it was a huge struggle certainly for a good year and a half until we separated finally. And I don't want to relive that year and a half ever again.
Right.
There are much worse things we can go through as human beings, but that in particular was extremely trying. I know I was not at any near close to my peak efficiency. I probably was operating at maybe 75%, maybe 50% for a good year and a half. And as a creative person, and furthermore as a small business owner, that's really, really hard. My former partner was the most understanding, saintly person I could ever hope to have. And she was a rock throughout that whole time, helping keep the business afloat, because I frankly wasn't all there at times. Cut to next scene, we separated, and it was hard because we have 2 children together, and we were married almost 20 years. And now we're friends, my ex-wife and I, but at the time it was very difficult. So I separated, and then what I found was I didn't have my family anymore. My ex-wife's family was still friendly with me, and they bore me no ill will, but I didn't have half of my family in regular contact. I wasn't living with my children anymore. There wasn't the 4 of us. And that was challenging then, and continues to be challenging, is not having that family and having that centering aspect. It's important to me, and not having that has been challenging. Over the past 6 or 7 months, it's become even more challenging in some ways. So I've had to negotiate some real pain again around that, pain I hadn't really expected to experience. So I think the lesson I learned from 6 years ago when we first started to separate is that I now have tools with which I can work to get me through these times. But make no mistake, as human beings, we have pain and difficulty and sadness and mourning and loss. And I feel very grateful for my life. Very grateful. And yet I can still feel extreme pain and have difficulty working. So I think that's the lesson I've learned, is how to just cope with adversity. And the way to cope with adversity is simply to accept the adversity. Change what you can, but knowing that there's going to be pain in life.
Yeah, on a daily basis, those emotions are going to well up. What do you put in place, or what tools might you use in your mind to get your head back on track and produce again?
Well, for me, there's a multitude of different things. What I have found recently is there's something called mindful self-compassion. Self-compassion apparently has gained some notoriety in the therapeutic world, and there's a woman named Kristen Neff that is kind of the leader of this movement, and basically it's just being mindful about one's pain and accepting that and knowing and accepting it fully and being with it. So I think just having some self-compassion is hugely important. We are our worst critics. We beat ourselves up all the time. We wouldn't treat our best friends the way we treat ourselves sometimes.
Well, that's true.
There's a difference between self-compassion and self-pity. Self-compassion is acknowledging the pain. Self-pity is wallowing in it and instead of recognizing it, fighting it, and then just not attempting to do anything about it. So self-compassion is really important, but also just being in the moment and present with whatever difficult emotions one's feeling, not trying to hide them, change them, but just be with them and say, wow, I'm really sad right now. I'm really angry right now. Whatever that is, I'm grieving right now. To the degree one can do that, one can move forward. And that's a very human thing to do. I think when things can get difficult emotionally, that's the best way I know how to get through it, is just to be with it and accept it. And then sometimes have coffee.
Hopefully with a good friend who can have compassion too.
Yeah, exactly.
How has that process changed you? Has it increased your empathy or compassion for others in any way?
Oh, absolutely. As I've been working with this, a lot of deep humanity comes out. During the past few months, as I've been experiencing this, I've noticed as I've been working, and it's not easy. It's every day is just trying to be kind to oneself is a struggle. But as I have been trying to practice it, I live downtown and there's a fair amount of street people. And in the past, what I've done is ignore them, brush them aside, just say, no, I don't have any money, whatever. But what I found I've been doing is actually stopping, looking them in the eye when they're asking me for money or whatever. If I have some, I sometimes give it to them. But also I ask them what their name is and what do they need, and shake their hand. And what I've found is one woman, her name was Shireen, and she wanted, first thing I said, what else can I get? What can I give you? And she said, I need some smokes. And I laughed and I said, can you ask for something that's less unhealthy? And she said, well, I'm off my meds and I can't afford them, but so the nicotine really helps. I said, okay, I can get that. So you want some smokes? What else? I ended up getting her orange juice, slice of pizza, an orange, and some chips, and talked to her for a while and hugged her and said, we're buddies now, right? And she said, yep. And so I'd left leaving that encounter with tears in my eyes because, wow, that was a human encounter. And I hope I made a difference. I don't know. So that's what I've been doing over the course of the past few months, is trying to be present with people, not just street people, but people in my life every day. Now, I don't recommend doing what I'm doing because there are some dangerous people out there. So I'm not advocating being friends with street people necessarily, but I think you have to be safe, but especially women. But I think showing them humanity, whether you give them anything or not, I think is the most important thing.
I think that the biggest lesson for me out of struggle is to build that bridge with other people and see people not as problems or a bother,
right,
but people in need, wherever they are, at what station they are at life. Are there any lessons that you can pass on to others that may learn from some of the lessons that you've picked up on?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson is have gratitude for what you have. I think it's been found that practicing gratitude, having a gratitude journal, actually helps improve one's mood and mental health. So remembering all the things that are wonderful in your life, and we're all in different parts of our lives, and we all have things going on. I want to be clear that I have an amazing life. I have, knock on wood, amazing health, knock on wood, my loved ones are in good health. I have a great job. I live in a great community. I love the place I live. I'm with someone I love. I have a lot of good things going on. And the hardest thing, the second part of this, is having gratitude, but sliding yourself a break. Because even for someone who has a lot of things going on, and it's easy to just say, well, I got a lot of stuff going on in my life. Why should I feel this way? And I found that it just doesn't help. So basically, self-compassion and just really got to go easy on ourselves. It's endemic in being a human being, I think. And to the degree you can just be kind to yourself, it'll make it so much easier to be kind to others as well. And we need that right now in this world.
Boy, is that true. Well, Dom, thank you. I appreciate your insights and your professionalism and the way that you show up in the world.
Thank you, Charles. I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate it.
Daniel Trimpe is the founder of Page Progressive, a Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina-based web development and design company that serves local as well as national clients. You can learn more about his company at pageprogressive.com. I have had the privilege of working with him on photographs for a few of his clients' web projects. A few of many things I appreciate about Daniel is his attention to details, incredible response time out of care for his clients, and his ability to ask thoughtful questions and guide clients into making decisions that serve them to the best of his ability. But even with the best practices, projects can go awry. So, hey, Daniel, tell me about an experience or some experiences in which you've dealt with your own thrash or feeling that you were caught into a pit of quicksand that you couldn't get out of.
Within our company, just like everybody, we have those times where we get into a project or a situation that due to, for whatever reason, it doesn't turn out the way that you think it will. And you're dealing with anticipations from yourself as well as your client that are unclear and nobody's happy and you struggle through them. I think about, we do logo development and branding. Sometimes that can be one of the harder things that we do, because when you're working through someone to encapsulate what they do into a small graphic and what are the colors that convey that, especially if you're working with a committee of people, that can be very difficult because everybody's going to have their perception and their thoughts on that. So you have to be pretty diplomatic on how you present it and how you work through that. And that's probably the area where I find myself most in those situations. When I do get in the thrash, as you say, in that type of a situation, it can be difficult because I'm frustrated. The client can be frustrated.
Of course. And
a lot of it comes from expectations. I guess I'll talk about what I've learned out of all this in a little bit and to try to avoid as much as possible. But when you're in it, I think really the only thing you can do is just be on it. Once you recognize, hey, things are happening that you aren't expecting, and you can see, you're not happy, they're not happy, is to be as upfront and honest in those situations. That can be hard, but having a conversation with somebody, particularly if you can get, if you are communicating with a board of folks, have an honest conversation with whoever is the end decision maker or whatever, to say, I'm really struggling here. I know that you guys aren't happy with what's going on in this process. It's taking longer than it's supposed to. And, we're going through more iterations than we anticipated. It's frustrating on our end to our staff. We're working very hard. We're doing our best. And I see, there's some problems. I just want to have a conversation about that. And, I want this to be a win-win for everybody. And I'm sure you do too. How can we make that happen here? Here's how I'm feeling. I get the feeling you're feeling this. What are some of the things that you're facing as the decision maker within your group? That's I imagine you're frustrated with things I don't even know about going on there too. But within the committee, what are ways I could be helping you to communicate this project or to deliver what your group needs to see? And so when I've had conversations like that where I'm being humble, I'm admitting I'm frustrated. I know you're frustrated too. I didn't want this to go on any further, but we had a conversation before we had a conversation about this. But, we're going to do everything in our bag of tricks to make you happy. And we want to make sure that you know that. And but at the same time, we've agreed to do certain work, and we're 200% above what we told you we would do, and it's still kind of stuck.
Right.
How do we get unstuck? And just have that conversation. And I'll say that conversation almost always immediately changes so it almost always changes the direction 180 degrees. And so most of the time what ends up happening is they'll say, I'm glad you brought this up. I have been thinking about this.
Right.
And, I've been talking with Sue and Bob, and, I'm kind of confused in all this too. I think from my end, what seems to be happening is there's just one guy on the committee that's just railroads everything that we're trying to do. I like the work that you guys are doing, but I can't make everybody happy, And so then you can start working through a troubleshooting process. Okay, well, what is a way that we can present to your board we're not going to make everybody happy no matter what we do. We've been trying in from all angles that there's just nothing we can do to make everybody happy. So what can we come up as a logical way to present this to the group that says, okay, everybody gets a vote, everyone gets, their participation in it in an equal way, so that, first, what are the criteria we're trying to achieve? We're trying to get A, B, and C. Okay, so whatever we're looking at, we're trying to achieve that. And then look at it from a empirical sense of, this is what we're trying to do. Here's the concepts we're looking at. And then empirically, we can have a vote on that, or some type of a process where people can participate. They all feel like they've contributed and they've been heard, but there's a conversation. Everyone knows you're not going to get everything you want, because what you want is different from what Sue wants, and Bob wants something different altogether from Sue. And that I've seen that happen over and over again. I'd say that happens most of the time with that conversation. If it doesn't happen, worst case scenario, I guess you just part ways with that particular person or client, and you just agree to disagree or whatever. I mean, that's happened a few times in our 11 years, but typically, if I found when you're honest with somebody about a struggle, they're going to come to your rescue a little bit, so it's like you have a little humble pie, they're going to help you along the way. And usually you're going to find a solution in the end that's going to make everybody as happy as can be.
Well, I don't know of anybody who is any more diplomatic in handling those kind of things than you are, having worked together on a couple of projects. You handle things incredibly well. Has there ever been a time where, again, something has just gone belly up? You just can't seem to salvage it for all of the diplomacy and humility and all of the things that you've tried. Something has just not worked. And is there a lesson that you've taken out of it that has gone with you that you could share so that others can learn from it in the similar situation?
I mean, there's been many cases where we're working on things, and anything that's artistic is open to interpretation and can be difficult to work through sometimes. As you know, as a photographer, that's the same type of world that you're in often. But
right.
The things that I found that have been the most helpful is, other than, just be honest when there's situations like that come up, because no matter what contract you have or paperwork or conversations ahead of time, there's going to be at some point something that comes up, and you're going to feel like, well, I didn't think about that before we started this project, and the client didn't think about that, and you're going to have to pull up your sleeves and work a little bit extra hard on what you thought, and the client may or may not appreciate that or even notice, but that sometimes you just have to do that. But definitely the most important thing I think you can do is be as upfront about potential issues that could come down the road as you can, the better. Okay, so often when people ask us for this, they sometimes really mean that. And so I just wanted to see if that's something that you might be thinking, so looking through situations that this is probably an obstacle that's going to come out of this, rather than just say, oh yeah, no problem, we can do that, it's all good. And then later grunting through it, and maybe it's okay, maybe it's not. But set the expectation for people as much as possible up front. In paper, that's great, but also you've got to have that conversation in person to just say, often this is the situation, this is the part of the process that is the hardest, whatever that may be in your world. But and there's going to be times where we're going to disagree, and I want to talk about how should we handle that. We're trying to decide on whatever, a logo or a color that we're using. We have a lot of thought behind what we're doing, and you may say you don't like that color, and that's fine. So what do we, how should we proceed in those situations where maybe we disagree? Do you want, us to just simply go with what you say, or do you want us to give a little bit of resistance to explain why we're doing it a certain way? Or, because everybody has their different philosophies on that. But I feel like the more upfront you can be, the better, because then later, if that does happen, you can always go back. Remember that conversation we had back, 6 weeks ago, where I said, there's going to be a part that's going to be challenging. Well, this is the part. This is where we're running into this. And back then you mentioned that this is the way you thought would be the best way to handle it. Again, that kind of tears the walls down. Oh, you're right. You did say that. If you set that precedent up front, it makes all the difference when you're in the weeds later with a client or whatever situation you may be dealing with. And you can't think of everything, but I found that even if you can mention in broad terms, there's going to be some times throughout this project where there's going to be someone's not happy about something. And I just want you to know it's okay for you to tell me when that happens, because I want to know if you're not happy so I can try to address that. And I'm going to do the same thing back to you. Is that okay? Just having that upfront contract with them to say, here's how we're going to work together. And I think it's for the best. And if you talk about that before the problem happens, it's a lot different than trying to talk about it after the problem happens, because then there's emotions involved. And, but you can't plan for everything, obviously. But I found that I'll try to at least slip that type of a conversation or that type of a topic into every conversation we have with the client as we're gearing up to work on something.
Right.
Just so that they know, don't expect perfection, because nobody provides perfection. That's just how it is. And there's going to be things that I do wrong. There's going to be things that you probably will be doing wrong. And we've got to work through this process. And so we need to kind of be going into it just knowing that. And I think that helps to set the stage for a good working relationship.
That is an incredibly valuable insight. I was making a note as you were talking for myself later in my proposal process to put that question early in the upfront, because I don't yet, or I have not yet, and it will go in there immediately. I mean, we address it in some other friendly ways, but that is so valuable to think about, just asking when we have difficulties or challenges, and there will be some of them if the project has any kind of large scope to it. How do you want to deal with it? And I think of that in terms of relationships in general, whether you're dating somebody or in marriage or working together in the office, just having a verbal agreement of how you're going to deal with a challenging topic or situation takes a lot of the fuel out of the fire of poor handling of it. So I love that, Daniel. Thank you. Well, thank you for your observations and your insights. That's very helpful.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk on this. It's helpful for me just to think through, these types of things too. So I think it's a very applicable issue and concern for anybody that, is providing services for anybody else, business or just general relationships. It's just a way of thinking about things and preparing for conflict ahead of time. And how do you do that? And what happens when you don't? And
you've given a great, very detailed and thoughtful answer.
It's something I need to think about more too. So I appreciate the opportunity just to talk through it a bit.
Kate Baldwin is a Seattle-based photographer and filmmaker specializing in food, lifestyle, and commercial work for editorial, packaging, and advertising projects. I first met Kate when we were both serving as board members for the American Society of Media Photographers, and everyone, to a person, talked about her uncanny ability to bring warmth, intelligence, and depth to every project. During some of the breaks at board meetings, we had a few conversations about the creative process and the perseverance needed in the face of the many obstacles creative professionals face on a daily basis. If you want to connect with Kate and see more of her work, you can find her at katebaldwinphotography.com. So, Kate, thanks for joining me to talk about being in the Thrash. What kind of incidents happen in your life and in your work that throw a wrench into your schedule, and how do you respond to them?
When one is in business for years, it's unavoidable to have some wrenches be thrown into the mix at some point. So I've experienced that feeling of having a wrench thrown into the system or into my schedule many times in different ways. As you know, I photograph a lot of food. One of the most important things to plan for is the props that go into a food shoot. So I was on a particular food shoot, and my client was a large PR ad agency, and their client was a food company. I had had long conversations with my client, the PR agency in advance of the shoot, and we had our set, our props, our color schemes, everything was set in advance, and we had this really beautiful approach that seemed to me to be quite lovely and put together. And the client, of course, was in another state. They didn't tell me prior to the shoot that the client was going to be part of the approval process. Towards the end of our first shot, an email was sent to the client 2 states away who said, "Oh, wow, the color scheme isn't quite working for me. Don't you have any polka dotted plates or something that would jazz this up?" They were requesting a completely different artistic approach than the one that I'd been told about. Internally, my first response was, "What? Are you kidding me? That wasn't what we spoke about." But that wasn't going to help the situation. After a moment, the food stylist and the art director and I had to sit down and say, okay, what are we going to do? Luckily, I've been in the business long enough that I had some spare, I had a lot of props on hand that we could dig into. And we'd planned well enough that we had alternative colors for each one. But we had to sort of dig deep and find a way to bring this fun, whimsical approach to a project that we thought was supposed to be more classy and graceful. And we just had to change our approach completely from where we thought we were going to be. So we had to really get resourceful, and we jumped online. We looked for examples right then and there. We had a powwow, and the thing that I really appreciated about that situation is that the client and the stylist and I really had to make a solid team. We had to be there for one another. We had to inspire one another and talk it through. And so it really ended up in a beautiful shoot that had, a little more energy and whimsy to it than the initial approach. And it wouldn't have turned out that way had any of us just flown off the handle or refused to participate. So it ended up being a great situation. And I think the team actually walked away with more trust in one another because we addressed a problem together in a good way.
Taking what could be a crisis and turning it around into a collaborative building process. Are there any words of advice or counsel that you would give to someone else who, say, maybe was new in the business, or they were just trying to deal with the regular thrash or derailment that comes on a regular basis? Any lessons that you've learned that you could pass on to help other people when they hit their wall?
Generally speaking, and I'm going to speak from the perspective of working with clients because I'm working with clients on a regular basis. And I'm expected to be creative in the moment and to deliver as expected. My advice would be to, first of all, plan as much as possible. I used to think, when I was new in the industry, I was afraid to ask questions because I felt that it would portray me as not knowing what I was doing. Whereas, in fact, what I discovered over time is that asking questions in advance is the most important thing I can do. It allows me to get on the same page with the client, and it allows us to explore all the options and really think through a project together. And we become team members. We begin working together towards the same mutual goal. So that sort of preparation is really important. As I go through the creative process, as I prepare for a job, I really try to take some quiet time with each project to let my mind wander on how I might approach something. And usually I think of 3 or 4 different possible approaches. We may settle on one approach, but if that approach doesn't work, if for some reason we get on set and the client changes the needs, or we start working towards something and it just needs tweaking, I've already had 3 or 4 other approaches in mind. And it allows me to fall back on some of that. So I've done my research and I'm prepared with plan B if plan A doesn't work. Ultimately, from a client perspective, I have to do right by the client. And I also have to do right by myself. So I always look for the places where I can do both. I look for the points where those meet. If there isn't a place where both can happen, then it may not be the right client or the right fit.
Great insights.
You're welcome, and thanks for asking.
Javier Leyva is an award-winning producer, director, and writer who has worked in marketing and television for more than 15 years and has created content for some of the biggest brands in the world. Currently, he's an associate creative director at Centerline Digital in Raleigh, North Carolina. In addition, Javier is the creator and host of Pretend Radio, a documentary-style podcast about people pretending to be someone they're not, which premieres this summer. You can subscribe to learn more about it at pretendradio.org. So Javier, tell me about how you deal with the thrash in your work when you get caught in one of those unfortunate but inevitable situations that every creative producer has encountered at one time or another.
I consider that thrash feeling as delivering the same thing over and over and over again, just because it's worked for years. I remember a time when we had a furniture client at a previous agency that I was working at that, they were our number one client. In fact, I could argue that they kept the place afloat. So you would think that we would give special attention to that client, but instead we got pretty comfortable delivering the same old TV spots. It's like, this weekend 20% off, next weekend buy one get one free, and it was just like a rinse and repeat type of client. And the client would sit in the edit bay, with our editor editing pretty much the same spot over and over and over again. And one day she was walking down the hallway and saw in another edit booth a different furniture client that we were working with. And it was a really creative spot. It was like we took furniture out into the city. So there was like a living room set in between the trolley lines. There was a sofa bed overlooking the skyline. So we took the furniture outdoors, and it was a beautiful spot. And she saw that, and she said, "Why don't you guys do that for me?" And it was shocking, because it was like, wait, I thought what we were delivering for you worked. I thought that's what you wanted. And we learned a very hard lesson there that eventually cost us the business, not right away, but that just because the client is asking for X, Y, and Z, and you're delivering X, Y, and Z, that's not what they're asking for is not necessarily what they need.
Right.
And when she saw really good creative, and she saw that it wasn't for her, and she knew that what the amount of work that she was bringing into our agency, I mean, you got to imagine, how do you think that would make you feel? I mean, I didn't blame her. We just got comfortable. And I think the biggest learning lesson there for me as a creative was to, listen to the client and listen to their needs and what they want, but always deliver that element of surprise. And if you don't change things up as a creative, as an agency, something new is going to come around, and it could be something that you deliver, something new and exciting that you're delivering, or it could be your competition delivering that. And in order to keep, and it's just like any relationship, with my wife, switch things up, like go out to a different restaurant, just change things up, because after a while, relationships, both in the agency world and the professional world, they get stale.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was just thinking it's like all relationships, and you've already said it. I think that there are more parallels between business and personal relationships than we often recognize. That, we can just forget that we are serving people, and we need to give them our full and thoughtful attention, and not just run them through the mill. So that's a huge life as well as good business lesson. So thank you. That's great.
Yeah, no problem. And, I've heard it from the other side as well. So that was a case where my client kind of felt unsatisfied with the work that we were delivering. But I've actually heard, other clients come to us, saying, this vendor that we're using out of California, they're just delivering creative. I mean, that is exactly what we want. It's almost like they're copy and pasting from our white papers or our press releases. And if I wanted to hire somebody to just copy what we were doing, we would just do it ourselves. We're looking for creative agencies that offer up new ideas, new creatives that are a little silly or outside the box. I mean, that's why we're paying you guys. It's not just to deliver the same thing that we're dishing out. And, a lot of agencies sometimes lose sight of that the tail does wag the dog a lot. And I think that once the tail wags the dog, that's the beginning of the end.
What are some processes or mindsets that help you get back on track when something's just gone off track?
One of the ways that I get myself out of it, and I get some of the people that work with me out of it, is to take them outside their comfort zone. So sometimes it's good to just pause the project if it's not going well, or when the project is just beginning, and do a little exercise. I do a lot of improv theater with my creatives. A lot of people are introverts, yeah, and some are extroverts. So they like being out there, being goofy and fun, and some of the quieter people don't. But I like doing a little exercise to break that tension in the room. We do a lot of games. This is kind of funny, but sometimes I'll start out a creative session by saying, all right, let's cuss in Spanish. Nobody knows Spanish in my team, so they all think it's funny, but it breaks that tension. Another exercise that I do to get us out of a rut. So like right now with this ebook, we kept hitting a wall. So we needed to go back to the drawing board and try to get re-inspired, and we needed to start from scratch. So I do an exercise often that is called brainwriting. And the way brainwriting works is that to accommodate some of the quieter people in the group, I make everybody in the team write down 5 or 10 ideas on Post-its, so one idea per Post-it. And so we have 5 minutes of quiet time. And then when that's over, we share each other's idea. So that gives everyone in the room an opportunity, the quiet ones and the more expressive ones, to say something and kind of pitch their idea to the team. And, some of the ideas are repeated, and we clump those ideas together. And some of the ideas are maybe half-baked, and some of the ideas are stellar. But as a group, we have now created a whole new energy, and we've created quantity of ideas that really start sparking in people's heads. So that's one way to get out of this thrash environment, is to really separate yourself from the actual problem. Look at it from a different perspective.
Huge life as well as good business lessons. So thank you. That's great. Thanks for listening to The Creator's Journey. If you enjoyed our theme music, the name of the song is You've Got a Home by Krista Wells. The Creator's Journey is published the first and third Sundays of each month, except for July and December. If you enjoyed the show, I would appreciate having you go to iTunes and subscribe. While you're there, if you give us a favorable rating and review, it'll make a huge difference in helping a newcomer easily find it. You can find links to today's guests, the people and books we talked about, and email me with your wonderful thoughts, all at thecreatorsjourney.com. I want to thank Yodelist for sponsoring this episode of The Creator's Journey. Yodelist is an interactive marketing platform for people in the creative world. With a vetted database of contacts from across the industry, Yodelist helps photographers, illustrators, creative directors, designers, producers, stylists, and many others to locate potential clients and gives them the tools to make those connections happen. If you want to find out how Yodelist helps creative people find one another for work, just go to yodelist.com. Today's podcast is also brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/TCJ. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.